First of all, I extend greetings to you all from someone who couldn't be here, all the way from Toronto, Ontario, Maynard B. Chuck Albert. And a week ago today, I was at my 60th anniversary reunion at Emerson College in Boston. Chuck and I were dorm mates. His wife died some years ago, and by going to our 50th Emerson reunion, he met a gal, a student, a classmate of ours from Montreal, who introduced him to the woman to whom he is now married very happily, living in Toronto in the summertime and in Miami in the winter. So things can work out well. He did want to be particularly remembered to somebody that I don't think is here. Is Barbara French here?
It's supposed to be.
I think she was signed up to come. Anyway, Chuck isn't here, Barbara French isn't here, but Dave Kaplan is, and Dave has some remarks. Then we're going to go around the room and ask anybody who wants to share some pleasant memories, we hope, to stand up and join us with a nostalgic look back on the good old days. Dave?
Turn off the PA!
It's working fine now.
Turn up the volume.
Turn up the volume. Alrighty, let's see. I have some regrets here for people who couldn't make it. Tony Sargent, Bruce May, Pat Reno. A lot of people tried to get Pat to come, but she didn't want to make it this time. Here's something from Susan Mill. To all the members of the group, my dad was talking for months about attending this year's reunion. I hope you all have a wonderful time. Bill Mill will definitely be attending in spirit. My family's been moved by all of your comments and posts about our dad, and I just want to thank you all. Sue Mill.
There was an RV in the parking lot.
I haven't seen Bill Flower. He always RV'd everywhere. He didn't come to this one. Speaking of people who aren't attending, I have a list of about, sadly, a little over half a dozen alumni who didn't make it. Catherine Mahoney from October 2014, Gene Kravzow in December, Lanny Pike, January 2015, Fran Mulcahy, May 2015, Frank Corbeil, June, and Justin Tarnowski, August 2015. G. Woodruff Sloan in October 2015, and Bill Mill in October. Those are the people I know about. I don't know if anybody knows of somebody who didn't make our list. A couple interesting things. One, I don't know whether you, for those of you that are on the internet, saw the information about the mic that's sitting over there on the museum table. That's on loan for these couple of hours. Got hooked up with it by a former chief engineer of WTIC, Jeff Hugebon. Got me in touch with Tony Fishman, who's CEO of Telefunken, lives in Farmington. And he put together this sheet, which is on the web. I'm just going to summarize from it, but he's run into 3 microphones like that in different locations. The 3 of them, one of them, the one over there, and you can see the dedication better on the picture on the web, is to Leonard J. Patricelli, Pat, from your staff at WTIC. There's another one that was dedicated to Bob Steele, and the third one, as his understanding, was used as a spare mic. He's very proud of having it, and I want to thank him very much for letting us see it here at the reunion today. Let's see, what are my other notes here? About the budget, we have not too much money left, but just enough for what I wanted. We're going to have about $250 to $60 left in the budget. What I did this time is if we got 40 people, the meal would be $30 a piece. Under 40, it's $35, but we have money in the budget, so the budget was eating the $5 a person because we didn't get high enough. We don't need it. I spent just $40 a U.S. mailing for the few people that are on U.S. mail. So yeah, we have 1,500, 14 now. It'll drop back down to 250 once I pay the Officers Club later. Let's see. Another thing is we've been meeting May and September every year to year and a half. Do people want to meet? The next one would be September. Do you want it to be next September or a year from September, which is what we had been doing? Feelings? Thoughts? Depends on how often you want to come to Hartford. For those of you that are a
Tells us
little
he's not
further.
buying long playing records.
Thoughts? 1 year, year and a half?
Sooner the better.
You want it next September, in a year? Not in 3 months, please. But next September in a year?
Yeah, we better.
Okay, we can do that. Now, the other thing is actually more complicated. We brought it up at other meetings too, but we have an unofficial museum which is basically 3 boxes in a spare bedroom of mine. A lot of it I've scanned in, a lot I haven't. And it's really, I don't like having it sit there just to bring half a dozen pieces to the reunion each time. And I'd like to contact the Connecticut Historical Society and see if they have any interest. A second thing after that, Dick Bertel's mentioned, he's given things down to, I have it written down, someplace down in Maryland that has a broadcasting museum. But thoughts, comments, anybody?
Try the Historical Society.
What about it?
Try the Historical Society.
I'd like to try it, yeah, very much so. I know they go through a lot of stuff locally. All righty, yeah.
Vintage Radio Museum.
The danger with the Vintage Radio Museum, and I'm a life member, is that they've gone through hard times at times and almost gone bankrupt. I don't trust them.
Okay.
Not that they're evil, but it's hard to have a museum like that and keep it going. So that way would make me very nervous. Yeah, Dan.
Is there any chance of making a virtual museum online?
That's what we've got with the stuff I have. I mean, I don't have the time in my life to scan through everything in those boxes, but we have that now on the WTIC alumni.com. An awful lot of audio, a lot of video, and a lot of scanned things too. So that does exist now. Not everything, but it's what we have.
But it makes it accessible for everybody.
It does. It does. But as I say, I don't have the time in my life to go through those boxes.
Great job on that website.
So since I don't hear any vehement objections, we'll contact the Historical Society and I'll keep you all informed on what's going to happen. I think I've covered everything I want. Did you have anything? No? Oh, pictures, video from today will be on sometime in July. We'll get them online and email will go out.
I may be mistaken, Dave, but I think when they named Grove Street Bob Steele Way, the Hartford Public Library might have set up some kind of a special exhibit just for Bob Steele. I don't know that for a fact, but if that is true, that would be another good repository.
May I have a polite rebuttal? I don't know whether it's true, but the story I heard was that the Hartford Times gave a lot of things to the library, and somehow they got thrown away. I don't know if it's true. They gave them to somebody. They gave them to somebody. I thought it might have been the library. Poor Bill Clay's not around anymore to know all the details, but that would make me nervous for them too if that would happen. I mean, anywhere you give it, you just have to trust them. But if I've already heard things, I'd rather not.
Well, in the meantime, there's a small display of items, including one of the chromium-plated 44BX microphones sitting on the table over here. And then the adjacent table is something I was given just last Sunday that some few of you might be interested in. The 50th anniversary book of WNEW in New York, which for many of us is the best radio station of all time. WNEW 1130 in New York. Milkman's Matinee. Jim McDonald's old enough to remember. I read about it. Now, does anybody remember Hal Knoller, K-N-O-L-L-E-R? Kneller, K-N-E-L-L-E-R? Yeah, he was an operator, a board operator. He came up to me last week at the Emerson reunion. He said he couldn't be here, but he knew about it, and he wanted to say hello. I never worked with him because he came in, after I left in 1965, which makes me really old. And so I put Hal on our Boobs mailing list. Now the Boobs is the bunch of old broadcasters. More about which in just a minute Steve Cohen will have some comments about that. So I invited Hal to join us tomorrow night at the Arch Street Tavern but it's already overbooked. They only allow us 15 spaces because what started out as a group that used to be outnumbering the band. The band is 16 pieces, by the way. It's a great, great group. It's now so successful that we can't even get in on our own. So we go on the second Monday of each month, and tomorrow night is one of them. So we're already booked up, so Hal couldn't make it anyway. But for those of you who really long for days of nostalgia, Steve Cohen will probably tell us something about he's got going similar to it up in Boston. So why don't you explain? They have a much more modest title than boobs.
Although we are appropriating the moniker Boobs Boston, or whatever you want to call it. But on July 23rd, we're trying something a little different, very similar to what we're doing here for WTIC. But on July 23rd, the media of Boston, which is all forms of media, radio, television, and print, we're getting together at the Florian Hall, the Boston Firefighters Union Hall in Dorchester. And so far, we've got about 300 people signed up. Wow. Hopefully, they're going to send their checks in. We're still waiting. One of the things I want, pardon?
Call Trump.
Call Trump. He'll send Air Force One over. One of the things we're going to do, that if we're successful, and I wanted to try and do it this year, but the other two fellows that I'm working with suggested, let's keep it small for the first time. But if we're successful, we're going to open it up for Worcester, Providence, and Hartford. Because I wanted to invite all of you to come up to Boston the 23rd and see what some of the Boston media guys have done. And most of us are retired. There are quite a few who have already paid, who are still working. But it's a little too early for some of the workers to get the night off. But if we are successful, we will open it up to the Hartford group for next year. On a different subject, I send the warmest regards from Joe Crowley. Joe is home in New Britain. He's battling bladder cancer right now. He's got 2 more treatments to go. And he just recently had a heart attack. And he's undergoing cardiac rehab. And about 10 or so days ago, I am an amateur radio operator, as Howie is, and maybe a few others of you are. I happened to hear a call sign on 80 meters. I said, damn, that sounds familiar. Called him back. And he looked me up, and we knew exactly who each other were. And Rich Zwerko, he was Dick Zwerko when he was at WTIC. He sends his regards to everyone here, and he's doing well. He's retired, enjoying life and enjoying his grandkids. So and he will send the regards of every one of us to the VOA folks who are still down in Washington. And I hope, Dick, you'll do the same when you get back and say hi to everyone down there from all of us as well. With that, back to you, Bill.
Okay, we've got a couple of VOA representatives here, of course, Dick Bertel and Tony Wings. We have somebody that never worked with us, but his dad did. I'm sure all of you fondly remember one of our favorite engineers, Fred Edwards. And Lee is right over here, looks just like his dad. Except I don't remember your father having gray hair.
His was white.
Now it's time to go around the room a little bit, share some memories. You can either do it by standing where you're seated or coming over here and using the microphone. But we have a flurry of exchanges every once in a while when Dave puts something on the website that draws particular interest. And just last week he did it with a 44BX microphone, and we used to use 99Ds too at RCA. But they're all collector's items now. I know just a little bit about microphones, unfortunately. But anyway, we have a display of a chromium-plated mic that Dave has already read about. It was presented to Leonard J. Patricelli, a fond recollection. And some of the people that we go back to the beginning, before even TV, will remember some names that were brought up because of the email flurry that resulted from the mention of the mics. And one of them had to do with the fact that we used to, in the old Studio F in the Grove Street building, which by the way is now called Bob Steele Way. Grove Street no longer exists. And I'm sure there's a whole generation saying, Bob who? That's the way it goes. At any rate, we used to have a pipe that had a microphone that was bi-directional. The news announcer would sit on one side and the staff announcer would sit on the other, which very often led to some embarrassing moments. And Dick Bertel can share one with us. I think the news script was written by that old character Don Gorman, who went on to a very successful career as the publisher of a newspaper, a weekly newspaper. I think it was called the Yankee Traveler or something like that in Bloomfield.
Yeah.
Don was a news writer at the old 26 Grove Street facility, and he used to like to inject certain lines in the script that he knew announcers would have difficulty with. So from there, I'll let Dick Bertel explain what I'm talking about.
Well, I don't know how funny it is anymore, but it sure was hysterical that night. And Bob was an easy breakup, Bob Arrow. And so the two of us together were poisoned, quite frankly. And he was reading the news, and he was talking about a Russian diplomat who was moving from Minsk to Pinsk. And I looked at him, I watched him, and his face started to turn red. And then he started to kind of wheeze out of his nose and ears. And then, long before I was due to do a commercial, he turned it over to me. And so I had to read the commercial with him. And somehow we got back on the air, but it was a little tense for a couple of minutes, I'll tell you that.
Well, I don't know if those things still happen. But, we didn't deliberately try to break them up. That was done in the newscast. But Doug Webster has some interesting stories because he produced that immortal announcer's introduction to WTIC about 50 years ago, which I think is still in circulation
It's on the
on
web.
tape somewhere. We played it back.
It's on our
It's on
website.
the website.
It's on the website. Good. Because we had it at one of these reunions. We played the whole thing during a dinner meeting. So, Doug, do you have any of those kind of stories you can share with us?
Well, I always love to tell people the story of Bob Ellsworth working in the nighttime booth on TV breaks when he got called in because the documenter tape found that he was putting his friends and neighbors in the credits of movies. And when they asked him why he did it, he said, "I was bored." And having worked late night breaks there, I was bored too. It's great to see everybody here. You know, I keep trying to come up here. I'm down in Pittsburgh now, and living with an old college sweetheart. We were united after 50 years. Life is pretty good. I've got a granddaughter who'll turn 3 this August. She's going to be here for her 3rd birthday with my daughter and her husband. And my son's a chef, a private chef out of Napa Valley, doing very well. And I still keep my oar in. I'm doing communications work for a company that does what's called Project Cargo Logistics, which is moving very large things around the strange parts of the world. And I was out in the West last fall filming the transport of a 792-ton transformer from Houston to New Mexico through Arizona to Utah. And it was quite an exciting experiment. So I keep myself busy, and it's always good to come back and see everybody and share war stories about the life in Bronx. I was telling people tonight about one night when I was on the air doing sports, and my floor manager gave me the cue with a pencil in his hand, which went right by my ear. Another night when, as you may remember, the lights in the studio were very precious and very expensive and very hot. So as soon as they got done with one section of the newscast, they would turn that part of the studio off immediately. And one night I was getting ready to do the sports, and they went to turn off the other lights, but they turned off the sports lights just as the camera came on in black, and me saying this disembodied voice saying, "No, the lights!" So those are my war stories.
To elaborate a bit on what Doug was saying about Elsie doing the booth announcing in radio and TV, he was one of the funniest guys in the world, as most of you know. He seldom took himself seriously, except when he would get invited to give a speech on foreign policy. because he was doing the 11 o'clock news, and many of the viewers thought he knew what he was talking about. And the irony was, he would accept those speech engagements and write up something and speak on foreign policy to a Rotary Club or something like that. But in between, he'd be doing things like introducing the Starlight movie. They only had a 15-minute newscast at 11 o'clock on Channel 3, and Starlight movie followed that. And during the break, Bob would say something like, "You're watching tonight's Starlight movie, The Mark of Zorro, with Tyrone Power, Linda Darnell, and the lovely Lou Holcomb." Lou was one of the engineers, and I carried that tradition over to Channel 30 doing my newscast too at 11 o'clock. I'd always throw somebody's name in. And tonight in the Johnny Carson Show, we're going to hear from so-and-so and so-and-so and the wonderful Larry DeBear. But we've got Doug and Dick. How about Bruce? Bruce Murray, you got a story for us?
Actually, these are two Dick Patel stories.
Stand up so we can hear
He
you.
was one of my favorite people at the station. One of them was our election coverage. What was the name of the town? Basra.
Basra!
He'd always talk about Basra, 8 votes or whatever it is. And we'd just be ready to come up on, I might be flooring you something, I'd go, "So what's the vote in Basra, Dick?" And we come up and the tears were coming down. The other one was, this is not TIC, but he was working at a radio station, The Mansion. What was
Kiss.
it? Kiss. And I was working commercial production at the time. And Dick and I would always break each other up. So we were down at the station doing a commercial. And we got ready to go. The producer said, "Okay, roll," and here we go. And Dick starts to crack up. Nobody said anything. And the director says, or producer says, "What's wrong?" And Dick points at me and says, "I know what he's thinking." That's it. He was a great guy to work with.
The story about Basra probably had to do with our 2nd District Congressman at the time, Sam Gatenson, who was born in a displaced persons camp after World War II. And when he went to Congress in the 2nd Congressional District, he was the only Yiddish-speaking member of the U.S. Congress. And he served about 10 terms, I think, didn't he? Yeah. Tony Riggs from Glastonbury, now at the Voice of America, or have you finally retired?
I retired.
Tell us something.
Well, I can tell about a time that I broke up on my college radio station. I was reading a newscast and came to an item about some poor chap who was decapitated when he put his head into an elevator shaft. And, you know, I was reading that with grim horror, and I happened to catch out of the corner of my eye the record librarian in the next studio, which was also our record library. He was down putting records away, and I saw him slowly straighten up and say, "Holy!" That came through the glass. I lost it. That's it.
Things have changed. Nowadays, that's legal to say. Now, let's go around. Let's see who else we're going to have to say something. Larry, I've mentioned you a couple of times. When Larry first came to TIC, he came from one of the top stations in the country. TIC Radio was part of what was called the Crystal Group. That was a radio sales representation group that had only the top stations in the country. WSYR in Syracuse, where Doug used to be, WSB in Atlanta, White Collins, WPRO in Philadelphia, in Providence, and WHAS in Louisville, Kentucky, where we got Larry DeBear from. And tell us how that happened, Larry.
Well,
Stand up.
when I was at Northwestern doing my graduate work, we put on every year in the springtime a symposium for the top news directors in the country. And Tom Eaton, of course, was among the top 2 or 3 news directors in the country at that time. And the graduate students would be responsible for putting on the symposium. And since I had been born and brought up in New York, I had always wanted to come to TIC. And when I made it my business to look up Tom. We had a long chat, and I asked his advice, because at that time there was no television station, which is what I wanted to work in. And he said, well, we have the application into the FCC, but we don't know when it's going to come. So I said, well, what would be better for my career path? To come to Hartford immediately and work in radio and get to know that market, or to go to work for an existing television station and hopefully TIC gets its license and come to work for you. And he advised me to go the television route. He said that would be much more valuable to TIC than anything else. That's how I ended up at WHAS in Louisville, because one of the other top news directors in the country at that time was a guy named Dick Oberlin, who was on a par with Ethan in terms of being respected as the top people in the business. So I immediately, after that, looked up Oberlin and asked him for a job. And he said, well, we don't have anything right now, but give me your, an address and telephone number where I can get to you. I happened to then get on the phone with my folks and told them about this great symposium that we had put on. And my parents decided, well, if this is what you want to do, we'll get you a graduation gift. They went out and bought me an old Bell & Howell 70D, which at that time was the news camera for the business. So they shipped it to me. I opened this package and I thought, oh great, what am I going to do with this? And I had this momentary lapse of judgment and picked up the phone and called Oberlin in Louisville. And he said, oh good, how's everything going? I said, well, in all honesty, you got to hire me now because my crazy parents went out and bought me a camera. So he said, well, tell you what, come down next weekend and I'll interview you. So I drove down from Chicago to Louisville and eventually got hired. I then began bugging Eaton like once a month, what's doing with the license, and keep me up to date. And finally, I was in the newsroom at WHAS one day, and so if you remember the old AP wire services, they would have a section every day, broadcast news. And this note came across, the FCC has granted TIC its license, a broadcast license. Immediately went to the phone, called Eaton, and I said, okay, when am I coming up? And of course, they still had some time to go before they actually went on the air. So eventually I did come up, was supposed to be interviewed by Pat Caselli. No, Fritz Morency. Morency was off that day, and I ended up being interviewed by Bum Mullins. And in spite of that, I got hired. And that's basically how that all happened. I ended up coming into TIC approximately, I think it was like 3 weeks before they went on the air, and ended up writing the Monday through Friday 6 and 11 newscasts for about 2.5 years. And if you want some stories about Ellsworth, I could write a book. But the two instances with Ellsworth that I'll just relate to for kicks. He had a story one night about a Greek ship that sank in the Mediterranean. And he started to read the story, and it came out, and this from the Mediterranean area, a week, and there was this pregnant pause because he had blown it. Instead of saying Greek, he had said week. And there was this pause, and it came out, a weak-looking Greek ship. And he just kept going. The other one, because he used to do things like this, as Bill said, all the time. So we decided to get back at him one night. And as the newscast was coming to an end, and he was going to introduce the movie, he was in the middle of signing off. And I not called down, but I got a message to the floor man, give him a stretch. And here he is in the middle of his close, and he started ad-libbing all over the place. And we're in a control room laughing like mad. And he then gets into the middle of some kind of a thing that he was talking about. I said, okay, give him a speed up. And he immediately started going like mad, and eventually got off. So those are the two stories about Steele. One more story, and I'll shut up. But we were talking about Bob Steele before. I don't know how many of you were working for the station, for the television station, when TIC first went on the air in broadcast house. Yeah, Dick, yeah, you may remember this, but the news set was right alongside the sports set. We were in the middle of, this was at 6 o'clock stop. We were in the middle of the news, and Bob used to have this habit of getting to his desk. And so I forget what, it might have been Ed Anderson doing the news, I don't remember who it was. But I was in a control room, and here comes, I can do this with this. Okay, Bennett is doing the news, okay? And all of a sudden, in the screen, here comes Steele. Like this. And he's about halfway through the picture and realizes he's now on the air. That's my favorite part to this day.
And Elsie used to sign off first. Bob Ellsworth here, good night. And he would do the news, it was black and white, 15 minutes, 11 o'clock at night in the beginning, in his 76th Army Reserve uniform, and just borrow somebody's sport coat to cover up the medals and everything else he was wearing. Because Bob was a Bronze Star winner in World War II in New Guinea, and he had a scar right here in his neck where he had been either shrapnel or bullet or something. He was a legitimate war hero, probably at the ripe old age of 18 or something, because he had gone to Colgate University, then into the Army, and afterwards came to us, and I think in our memories, he's one of the most beloved characters we've ever known. But there's some other characters that we don't know as well as some of the people who are here who can tell us about them. So Ken Bennett has something he wants to say about one of the characters sitting right near him that we may not know much about. Come over here, Ken.
One of the characters, by the way, is my wife. And at June 26th will be our 50th wedding anniversary. I lived in Philadelphia, she lived in Bloomfield, and I was a teenager, and I used to listen to Bob Steele before the signal change, whatever that was called.
Antenna switch.
Antenna switch, which I think was sponsored, to find out if my wife was going to have school that day. And it was a way to stay in touch. And when we came here, Steele always called me college boy. And if I made a mistake in spelling or anything, he really screwed the thing. But I wanted to share something with you, and it's with Paul Hayes. I need him to come up here. Now, we went a couple of decades without seeing each other, and then I had a convention in Boston, and we met in the supermarket, and I don't know if you recognize my voice or I recognized your voice.
Or each other. We just recognized each other, right?
But anyway, when I came to TIC in '69, I was 24 years old, and I don't know what Paul remembered. How old are you now?
I'll be 82 in October.
So you're good. You were an old guy. He was 34. But anyway, you sort of became my mentor, partly because of some of the shifts. But I don't know if you remember, but you took me on a tour of the 3rd floor on a Sunday morning. Now, I understood that we would be fired if we were caught. But he showed me the liquor cabinets and the glasses and the gentleman's bathroom with the golf putting sewer, whatever that was. And I kept thinking, oh my God, if they come in now, I got 2 babies. But we had a good time. I just want you to know, all those of you set me straight on a lot of things. And I just had a lot of fun, and it was just a real fate that we ran into each other years ago. I told you about the TIC and the reunions, and you've been here ever since.
Pretty much so, including telling you that night where to go for dinner. You remember the Lindstrom's old colony house down on the boulevard?
Yeah, because I didn't know anything about anywhere, and I thought we were in a bad neighborhood.
You were. Well, it's sort of were, but it isn't anymore. It's very expensive out there.
I thank you for all you did for me way back then. Did they hear what your age is?
Everybody heard it. I'll be 82 in October.
And I'll be, I am 71. And David, how old are you?
68.
68? Is there anybody here between 68 and 71? Wow, okay.
But the best part about the tours of the upper level was you could go outside and you could walk around, and there was always X-rated. There was always something going on in the bushes. And Joe Crowley was the first one who took me up there. And he said, okay, now, be very quiet. And open the doors, we go out, peek over the side, and just down below you. I don't know who they were, what they were doing out there, but Joe knew all of those places. Because there was that balcony around the offices up there.
Now you find out.
One of the things that Paul and I would compete for, we'd get a phone call that a fax had come in to Joe downstairs, the receptionist, and which one of us was going to have to go down and get it. I don't know who won, but I just remember.
You probably did most
It was,
of it.
and it was always
You were
exciting.
younger.
I was just hoping that I didn't get bitten by your dog.
Or a skunk.
Or a skunk?
Yes, yes.
But the other thing we always competed for was, do you remember the Chevy? They had that Chevy Interceptor, and it was a police interceptor, and it had a really a big engine in it. You go up, as soon as you drove out of the garage, you used 2 gallons of gas, that kind of thing, and you zoom around town. Of course, nobody stopped because they all knew that it was the TIC car, and then you could drive that. Crowley was the one who really liked that.
Good times, a long, long
Oh,
time
they
ago.
were.
Unforgettable.
The best though, I was thinking about things that happened, and Artie Johnson, remember him, the overnight guy? All right. I don't know what it was with him. You could be sitting there asleep, barely breathing. Artie would come around, say, what's the noise? He'd want to know. He could hear things, and all through the night he would hear things going on. The other thing that happened, Larry DeBear, I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about Connecticut politics. They had me up in Springfield, but every so often they'd assign me to something. Larry would give me a list of questions, a list of outcomes, a list of things to look for, and I would go, they thought I was an expert. All thanks to him. And then, of course, the last thing was, I was up in Springfield, and I think I've told this story before. All the changes were taking place, Mike Von Endy and that whole, the new crowd, and I would get these phone calls, come in, we need to talk to you. And I was about as clueless as could be, because I was doing crazy things up in Springfield, and I'd say, I'm too busy. And finally one day they said, no, we got to talk to you about whatever's going on, whatever. I said, okay, how about 2 weeks from Thursday? And they finally agreed to it. I came in, and we came out of the newsroom, and instead of heading to get coffee, we headed down to, who was the station manager down there at the time?
Radio or?
No.
Mr. Tyrrell?
No, for Post Newsweek, because this was after and we went down there, and instead of going out to get coffee, we headed down to the manager's office. We sat down, because the light came on then, and here we are.
Thank you.
Of course, he's talking about Arthur Nelson Johnson Jr., the all-night man, who was particularly sensitive to any outside disturbances of any kind. He would get all tensed up if anything was.
You could have
distracting
headphones
him.
on,
Yep.
and he would hear them over 2 studios away.
And Fred, what was his engineer's name?
Pearson?
Fred Pearson, the all-night DJ, all-night engineer. And of course, talking about Tom Eaton, he ended up marrying that gal in the front desk, Joan Hyde Everett. A gorgeous gal. Jim Hazeltine was crazy about her, as were most of the male employees of Broadcast House, as I recall. And Tom's son Bob went on to become, I think, news director out in Minneapolis, St. Paul, KST.
California.
Where was it?
He ran the NBC News operation in Los Angeles
L.A.
for a number of years.
Very good. Of course, Tom is gone. I don't know what it became of Joe, Kai, but those are memories that take us back a bit too. Now, we want somebody to tell us about global warming. We have just the person for it. If you remember the Travelers Weather Service, you'll remember Jim McDonald.
About global warming. But when I first started doing TV, weather on TV, we had a blank screen, and on either side there were monitors so you could see what was going on, and it was very confusing when you first started doing this, because you're trying to put your finger on a weather map where, you know, something is happening, and you had to figure out by looking at the monitor where to put your finger on the screen. So one day I was looking at one or the other, and somehow I got twisted. I went all the way around. I really cracked up after that. Anyway, now you may not know, I'm an anti-global warming meteorologist, and I'm not going to go into it. But that's what I do for what I do for fun. I belong to a group of 25 scientists in the Hartford area who we email back and forth and give each other information about the global warming situation.
Whatever happened to Barbara?
Barbara?
Yeah.
She died. Yeah. She died a few years ago. The only weathermen left around here are Ken Yary and Jerry Wilson. There was an old weatherman, Bob Zanes, who is out in Ohio. Those are the ones I really...
About Art Horn.
Art Horn, oh yeah, he does a lot of speaking engagements. I think he does it for a living about global warming, anti-global warming.
Where's Ken Gary?
Ken Gary, out in Eastford.
So is it that you don't believe in global warming?
No.
Because?
Not man-made global warming. There are warming and cooling cycles have been going on for millions of years, including 4 ice ages, and which had nothing to do with man, of course.
So if you don't believe in global warming, why do you think we have so much of a difference in weather over the years? Everything seems to be changing.
Oh, this brown one.
When I grew up in the 1938 hurricane, which was the worst hurricane ever to strike New England. 600 people were killed. You talk about bad weather. It's nothing new about the weather at all. And it is weather changes. It's not climate change. Climates change over a long period of time. But all this stuff they call climate change is weather change. These are weather changes which are more or less normal.
Good enough.
That's what you get to go to a place like MIT. What do they do? And Dr. Thomas Malone was an MIT alum also. We used to always have to introduce him as he was coming on to do the weather. Now the weather with Dr. Thomas Malone. If I ever got sick, I was going to go look up Dr. Thomas Malone. Now, those are the good old days. Things have changed. And the old days are now the new days, and the word good does not apply. And I'm afraid to have to tell you this, but we have a former WTIC radio news person who is proof of what I'm saying, Dana Whalen. Explain what happened.
Thank you. I actually did not expect to talk, but I'd rather tell you about the old days, because I was in Broadcast House for only about 6 months after the sale. So in a way, I'm almost not part of this group, because I was the new era. But Dave graciously got Frank Stern and Alan Segel and I kind of included under the umbrella, because we were hired in the Broadcast House days. So I worked there until the Gold Building studios were finished, some of which you see on Dave's screen. And the things that I remember from there, you talked about the car and leaving in the car. First Saturday morning that I worked, I was working with Bill Schofield, Bill Stevens, some of you probably remember him. And something happened up at the Institute for Living. No, it was Trinity. and I had to go get the car and go. I had never been shown the garage, been shown the car, or knew where Trinity was. Just take the elevator down, do this, do this. Wound up at the Institute for Living instead of Trinity, and Bill said, oh, opposite halves of the same coin, just keep going, it's a little bit farther on. Got the story at Trinity, and went back and drove around and around the block at Constitution Plaza, because nobody ever told me how to get back in either. So I had no clue which of these various entrances even was the garage that I needed to go into, let alone how I was going to open it. So I had to radio for instructions on how to get back to the radio station from right outside the door. But the other thing that I remember, I had come from Omaha in a very small operation where we kind of did the news ourselves. And when I got to WTIC, which had staff announcers, and which had people reading live commercial copy. And I remember going in for one of my very early newscasts, and there were 3 live bodies in the studio with me. Somebody to open it, and 2 different people to read spots along the way during my newscast that I was going to be reading. And I was just terrified, and I was concentrating so fully on my script that it wasn't till it was over and I looked up that I saw that one of the announcers, and I can't remember, maybe Dick remembers, or if John Stevens was going to be here, maybe he remembers, somebody had worn a Groucho glasses and a nose with a mustache during the whole newscast, hoping to break me up. And I had been yeah, except that it was inside the studio. Yeah, Schrago would have done that kind of thing. He opened the fire extinguisher once on the glass outside me. But I had been so focused on the content of this newscast and not screwing up with all these live people like elbow to elbow with me that I didn't even see it until it was all over. But after about 6 months, we moved into the Gold Building, and then I spent some time in television, and then came back 15 years ago, and then a year ago they decided that they didn't need a news director anymore, that all of the other CBS stations had news and program directors, or alternately, they had program directors who appear on the air. And since their program director did neither, they needed to expand her horizons and move my job out. My favorite comment about that was Dick Ollis, whom some of you may know, who's getting an award from the Connecticut Council of Freedom of Information on Wednesday, by the way. But Dick Ollis said afterwards, he says, they're not going to have a news director. What are they doing? Are they going to run a news commune? So, I did a little bit of fill-in work last summer at WNPR, and I've been enjoying myself. So, I'm trying to move outside my comfort zone a little bit. And if you were asking if anybody's between 68 and 71, because you hoped that Dave was the youngest, but actually I'm younger than Dave, just a little. And the other thing, it couldn't have been Sam Gatenson, because Gatenson was elected later, because in 1974, when I first came to Hartford, Bob Steele Jr. ran for Congress in the 2nd District. So it wouldn't have been Gatenson when we were talking about the Basra vote.
Sam was from Basra, that's why I made the connection.
Is that second or first district?
That's the second. First is Larson, and Cotter forever before that.
That was Robert H. Steele.
And Larry Meadow, after he left WMSB and went to work for Governor Grasso, he was the press guy. If you try to call the governor today, there's a layer of about 6 people you have to go through to do what Larry did alone. I mean, I've yet to talk to like the main press guy.
We former state employees are very proud of Larry. We don't mention that in public very often because everyone is so envious of the fact that we got an honest job finally. With a pension where the checks don't bounce and very nice medical benefits. Now, Dan McAuliffe played baseball, but it's very similar. Dan McAuliffe living down in Venice, Florida. Geez, that's the rich side of the state, Tell us something about when he came from WBUR, Boston University, and was in the original floor crew, I believe, with Hoover Sutton and Don Moore Dick Ozier, and Jim Stewart, and Ed Gracie Alumni, and the lovely Luzerne Holcomb, whom I mentioned earlier.
An engineer.
He was an engineer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Dan, you've got the mic.
That goes way back. In fact, I used to do radio station. I don't know if you remember. We do it every day, Jim and I, but then you had Ranger Andy before Jim. And we had it was live. In those days, we had no tape. It was live. So you never knew what was going to happen. And every day we had a live guest of some sort. And this particular day, it was Dave Bonney from Laughing Brook Nature Center up in Massachusetts. And Dave, every time he'd be on, would bring an animal from the Nature Center. And those of you who are unfamiliar with the setup of the radio station, it was built like a radio station, the set, so you like you're in a radio station. And the big fireplace and everything was knotty pine. And they would have a rolling platform. And I don't know if it was Jim or whether it was Andy had Dave Bonney on that day. And Dave brought a big rabbit, and it was Christmas time. And Christmas time, we had the live studio set up with probably somewhere around 25 kids. And they were sitting on benches. And Dave and Andy were behind this rolling counter. And Dave came in with a rabbit in his arms. He was standing on the inside. And Andy wasn't you, Jim, was talking with him. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the conversation, the rabbit jumped out of Bonnie's arms right to the Christmas tree, pulled the Christmas tree over, smashed all the things, and the kids were screaming blue murder because the rabbit ran under the benches that they were sitting on. It was pandemonium. So we went to Black Fast, went to a commercial, and regained our composure, and we went back on the air. But you never knew what you were going to face. And another time we had a guy who came in with a horse, or a camel. And naturally we couldn't bring the camel on the set. So the camel came and stuck his neck and head into the set, and he interviewed the guy on the other side. Well, while the interview was going on, the camel decided he wanted out. So gradually, as he's conducting the interview, the camel is backing up. Gradually, they backed right off the set completely into the dark site behind them. And we just saw the very edge of them. And they continued the interview that way and ended. And again, we went to commercial and finished. So it was an era of TV when it was live, and you never knew, and you always had to have a backup. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it all. And now I'm retired in Venice, Florida. I'm like 3 blocks from the beach. And it's a whole different world. A whole different world. Nice to see you all.
Talking about the Ranger Andy show, of course Ranger Andy used to sing at the opening, "My name is Ranger Andy," or whatever. And the guy that took his place is going to come up here now and sing us a song. Come on, Jim Thompson. Now, we keep track of each other even after these events, once in a while, by watching on TV and seeing a familiar face. So I never had the pleasure of working with Jim back-to-back at TIC because I had left long before he arrived. But I used to see him on the Mako car commercials. You better get Mako. Better get Jim.
Thank you, thank you. I'm standing funny, I've got a heck of a cramp in my right arm, that's why. I don't know what it is. No, it's good to be here, thank you. Boy, Danny, every afternoon, doing the radio station for 5 years, great fun of time. Talking about funny guests. We did start having, I guess, more guests than Andy did.
when he was doing the show for all those years. Strange enough, I never met Andy himself, but we had guests from when we first landed on the moon from the what's the place up the mountain?
Hamilton Standard?
Yes, Hamilton Standard. They came on with suits and all that kind of thing, and we did do songs on it. Had a friend of mine play piano and we'd sing songs. And one time, Sergio Franchi, you remember Sergio Franchi?
Yes.
The singer, he was, I met him at the hotel next door after seeing his concert at the Bushnell, and said, would you come on the show? And so, to my surprise, he said, sure. So they sat, as Danny said, on the,
Benches.
kids on the benches, and way up on the last bench, I'd get people's names, would come on and say that somebody did the Pledge of Allegiance, and they did the names. You know, you say, my name is Paul, and this, that, and the other, with a beanie on their head. And way at the end, said, your name? He stood up with a beanie on his head and said, Sergio Franchi. With that. But I never had the pleasure of working with Dana. You came after I left, but anytime that I turn on TIC and hear you, I know they were in good hands. And of course, what she says is so very true, and I think that's what's the matter with our news nationally right now, is that people who are really not in news are directing news people. A lot of times you hear these people with their earphones on, and some person who has no knowledge of news or where the interview with somebody important is, and they'll say, well, end it now, or go to a commercial, or whatever they're saying in their ears. And so you think something more is coming, but that's another story of what I think of the news right now. Breaking news, as we're talking. Everything. If you go to a party, it's breaking news. But what a time we had at TIC. We talked about Bob Ellsworth. I think I mentioned it before. I got to TIC because of Bob. He used to, I worked up at Channel 40 in Springfield, and he'd come up there and do commercials, and we got to be friendly. And one day he told me, he says, would you like to leave here? I said, what do you mean? He says, well, there's going to be an opening at WTIC. I said, oh, really? How do you know that? He says, well, I'm leaving. So he arranged it for me to come down and have my auditions and everything else, and I was lucky enough to get in there, 68. One of the first nerve-wracking things I had to do was to sit beside this man right here, Larry DeBear, reporting on some election or the other, and I was brought in to do some, and sitting beside this man who knew it all, as somebody said before, of all the ins and outs of it, give me a piece of paper and such and such and such. Somehow I got through it, but it was nerve-wracking. You always learned a lot from everybody there. And I also knew Bob Schrago very well. One night when, I believe it was Ed Anderson, was doing the radio news. And the door was here, the engineering was here, I sat here, Anderson was there, I believe, doing the news. And I had to do the commercial. And the commercial had just started. Without any kind of sound, I saw something like, something was coming up over my head. And I was reading and trying not to look up. And what it was some kind of an underwear, which was hanging on like a big pole or something. And he was just hanging over my head. I barely got through that commercial when he did, but that was Bob Schrago. But it's good to see everybody here again, and it's always good. And of course, Dave, you are so special. You're all of us. Just think if 1974 had come along and somebody like you hadn't taken over to do this, we would not be probably sitting here enjoying each other's company after all these years. Thank you.
We're
We're going to have everybody get up and say whatever they want when they get the chance, but Dick Ozier's turn is coming next, because he's sitting over here looking like he's about to nap for a while. I don't want him to do that.
He's in a semi-coma.
He's semi-comatose. Dick is now retired too. Anybody whose age begins with a numeral 8 is probably retired.
That's right, I hit the big number 8-0, and I wasn't looking forward to it. As a kid, I wanted to be 9, get into Cub Scouts. I wanted to be 12, I get into the Boy Scouts. I wanted to be 16, get my license. 21 was okay. But I'll tell you what, the thought of turning 80, I don't have too many friends that are 80 years old, and I wasn't looking forward to it. But anyway, it's really great to be here today. Listen to all the stories, and one of my favorite stories is to one of the on-air talents that really was a great person, and I'm talking about Gayle King. Gayle King was pretty interesting in the fact that she and I had a great relationship. She would come down to the office door and say, "Dick, can I speak to you?" And I'd say, "Gayle, what's wrong? You lost your earpiece, right?" And she'd say, "Yes, but don't holler at me, please. Just give me an earpiece and I'll go away and we'll both be happy." And I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm coming up to that cube that you sit in and work in, and I'm going to find all the earpieces that you've lost." And no, you're not. You're not going to come near there. But anyway, to think that Gayle King is where she is today is pretty amazing. And that she started with us. And I see her on the air and I just say, that's a magnificent story. And it was really a pleasure working with her. She was a little goofy at times, but I can remember when she first got there, she showed up and we have it on a blooper tape. Gayle King was quite heavily endowed in the front there, and her blouse was open and the bra was showing. And this went on, and people would check out today and laugh. But anyway, she was really a sweetheart, as were many of the other on-air talents. And it was a pleasure doing that through the boat races down in New London, the political conventions, whatever you say, it was a lot of fun. And I was glad to be a part of it. And it's good to have everybody here as we have today, and brings back old thoughts, and it's a pleasure for me to be here.
Speaking of boat races down in New London, today is the 151st Yale-Harvard Regatta. And we did must have been the 100th, and whenever it was. But Harry Parcells, the late TV director, used to refer to that television broadcast as the greatest maritime disaster since the sinking of the Titanic. It was only the first time in its history that it got rained out because of a severe storm. So instead of going on a Saturday or whatever, we had it postponed for a whole day, and Bob Steele was doing one end of it. I was doing up by the Coast Guard station. We had people lined up. We did it for 2 years, I think. And that's all, because it was a difficult race to do. It's starting at 2:45 this afternoon. Yale won last year, and Harvard had won for the previous 150 years. So we'll find out later on today what happened. 4-mile race, very difficult. Oldest intercollegiate sporting event in the country. Now, a fellow who's a walking repository of all things WTIC, AM, and TV is sitting here waiting to say something. I can see him. He's still working, believe it or not, in spite of his old age. Jim Stewart, come on up. Handsome Jim, who was a very good clarinet player.
Yeah, clarinet and tenor, yeah. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Wonderful to see everybody here. It's so great. But I have to comment on a couple of things that were talked about earlier, one of which was you talked about steel. And not only were Bob and I fellow workers, I lived around the corner from him in Weathersfield, so we were also neighbors. I lived on Cotwell Drive, he lived on Walker Hill Road. And it's funny, you talked about not many of the people, when they named the street after Bob, I was there that day. It was a bitterly cold December day. They had a good crowd, and a lot of people who were there were a lot younger than I expected to see. So there are some young people that remember. And I had the honor, the family asked me, being a neighbor and a friend and a fellow worker, to say a few words. And I had to, I said to his son Bobby, I said, you know, the story I'm going to tell is probably, I don't know if you're going to like it or not, but I got to tell it anyway, because anyone who knew Bob can relate to what I'm about to tell you. I got up and I looked out at the audience and said that I hoped that there were no Wethersfield police officers present. And then went on to say that, as you know, Bob would always do the sign-on when they had school cancellations during a snowstorm. And I would ride in with him because I lived around the corner. I'd walk around the corner and meet him in the driveway, and off we go. Well, the first time I did that, it was snowing to beat the band, and he said, "Get in the car." I said, "No, I'm going to wipe the windows, Bob." "No, no, don't worry about it." I'm thinking, okay. So he backs out of the driveway. Walcott Hill at that point is a straight road, there's no curve. He guns the car, slams the brakes on, the snow flies off. He says, "See, I don't have to do this." and that's the honest to God's truth. And if you know Bob, that is something that Bob would do, in addition to selling his ties and his shirts in the hallway and all the other crazy things he did. The other thing that I want to mention that came up today, Bob Ellsworth's name came up an awful lot. And everybody in this room loved that man. I think everybody who came in contact with him loved him, and I'm one of his biggest fans. And I had the honor and privilege, first of all, standing in his room. Bob was a member here. And my dear wife, Linda, and I, and he and his wife, spent a few evenings here and had a great time dancing and dinner and all. But during the waning days of Bob's life, I spent a lot of time with him over the last 3 months or so, and took him to various events. He was very involved in the West Hartford Veterans Day celebration each year, and we went down there when he wasn't feeling very well. He was really at the end of the thing. I would drive him down. He was in a wheelchair. It was kind of tough, but he participated. And the last thing we did there was the last time he was out. I didn't know at the time it would be, was a rehearsal for the upcoming Veterans Day. And then, of course, things got a little tough. And Linda and I had the privilege, you talked about the salute. As you know, we closed every newscast with a salute. And as you pointed out, he was in uniform underneath somebody else's blazer, you know. But when Linda and I left him, I think it was a Wednesday night, we lost Bob on Friday. We were at the hospital in New Britain. And the last thing he did, first of all, we were there that night, and even as bad as he felt, the nurse came in to take his temp or his vitals or something, and I said to her, "You know who this guy is?" And he looked at me and rolled his eyes. I said, "He's a big star. You know, you're treating somebody that's really important." So Bob looks up at her and he says, "He's my agent." Even then, this is Wednesday night, less than 48 hours before he left us. And then, as I left that night, and Linda and I said our goodbye, from the bed, up came the arm. Out the foot of the bed. That's the last time I saw him alive. But I had to tell that story when you talked about the salute. The guy was just simply one of the greatest. But you know, regarding TIC, all of us have a million memories, a million stories. I was fortunate enough to have spent half my broadcast career at WTIC, and almost the other half at what is now WFSB. Went through the transition and had some great experiences at FSB. But you know, you can't take away what we had. What we had, and I'm telling all of you something you already know, what we had was so special. Really doesn't exist, I don't believe anymore. And frankly, I'll say this out loud, I think that I see people on here now who couldn't have got a tour at TIC, and unfortunately that's where we are. And the other thing, seeing Larry DeVere here, I don't know if you remember this, Larry, I produced and directed Governor Grasso's funeral, and Larry worked with the governor then, and we had an overzealous female reporter who will remain nameless, and I had one of my camera positions was up above where the casket was, and Larry and I had this conversation. I asked for the location just to see people passing through, and I shot it from behind Governor Grasso. So we weren't shooting into the casket, the open casket. And I promised Larry that I wouldn't. And this overzealous reporter showed up to do a live shot. And insisted on having her cameraman go up and shoot down in her casket. And I said I wasn't going to do that. I'll pull us off the air before I would do that. And then she called Dick Hollis, who was then a news executive in the group, and Dick backed me, fortunately, and we got rid of her. So it was one of those, one of those things that wouldn't have happened at the old TIC. And this was now the new FSB. And it was somebody who just thought that that would be a good thing to do, and it was totally inappropriate. And again, I had given my word to you, Larry, that that wouldn't happen, and to the family. So it's just a couple of little stories. I'm not going to talk about me. I've done a million things. I love the career. I love people that we all work with. We all did a lot of things together. We bled together. We got mad at each other. I got madder than most, probably. I think Paul Hayes would probably attest to that. But I love what I did, and I love the experience, and I'm just very, very thankful every day of my life to have had that experience and to have worked with people like are in this room. So thank you very much. And really,
A little follow-up to the Bob Ellsworth story. His widow, Rosemary, died within the last 6 months. And I'm in touch on a fairly regular basis with a fellow who was the best man at Bob Ellsworth and Rosemary's wedding, a fellow named Ray Rice, who left WTIC to become a newsman, WNEW, 1130 in New York. Then he went on to Indianapolis. He's an airplane aficionado. He teaches flying and flies himself. And he was doing a Charles Kuralt type of show on WISH TV, which is the big Indianapolis station. And when he heard that Bob was fatally ill with esophageal cancer, he flew out from Indianapolis to see him for the final time. So he stayed with us. We went up to see Bob at the convalescent home in West Hartford near the Reservoir, where he was residing at the time. And Elsie was in great spirits. He wasn't healthy, but he was up here. He was the same Bob Ellsworth. And we got talking about things. He told us once about how he had auditioned for some kind of a part in a play or a drama or something to do with audio and TV. And they were looking for 3 speaking parts: a straight announcer, an Englishman, and a German. He won all 3 parts. That was what he was capable of doing. And he was a very loyal boob, by the way. He was a pretty good pianist himself, you know. And so he used to come to the boobs all the time. So did Arnold Dean. And Arnold went to see him too, just days before he died. So there's a guy that we can lovingly remember as we do each other. But the rest of us are still here, so let's enjoy it while we can.
Excuse me, I have to go to a niece's recital.
Ken has to go to a niece's recital. That's our number 1 priority.
Take care. Good to
Okay.
see you all.
John Stevens is coming up here to take the phone, am I correct? Are you? He can still walk, so he'll make it all the way. You've got to tell us one lasting memory that you want to share with the rest of us.
I think I'm the oldest guy in the house here. What about
85.
87? You will then just I happen to be 80.
Hold the mic close.
I shall hold the mic close, my director is saying here. Any number of stories. I'm going to repeat one that I shared at the table a little while ago. There was one occasion when, for whatever reason, I don't know, but I was assigned to do the 11 o'clock Channel 3 news. Jim Stewart was the director. Excuse me. I was in the bathroom putting on makeup, apparently, and Jim was getting worried that there was no one on the set. And he called down and he said, Arnold Dean's about to do sports. He said, tell Dean to get on the news set. And Dean responded, and what'll I do once I get there? I'm going to let it go at that. It's been fun to sit here and reminisce and be reminded of any number of things that took place there. I look at Doug Webster and I could tell stories about Doug Webster. I'm not going to do that. But I want you to know, Doug, I have a cassette version of the introduction to WTIC. And you remember cassettes. Doug was the guy that put that together and narrated it. And it's a priceless piece. Thank you, sir. Thank you all.
All right, now, who hasn't had a chance to speak, to say with their piece? Okay, you want to come up here to the microphone?
I have one other thing that I don't think anyone realized about Bob Ellsworth. He was an expert in pregnancy. When I was expecting my first child, I was apprehensive, as young-to-be mothers usually are. And my husband, in TV Master Control, very often worked the second shift, and I didn't want to stay home alone. So I used to go to work with him and park myself in the lunchroom waiting for him to get finished. Bob was always in there. For some reason or other, I always saw him. He was sitting in the lunchroom. And when I came in and we sat and discussed different things, I mentioned I was apprehensive about my first pregnancy. Well, he monitored me through the whole thing. Every time I sat with him in the lunchroom, he had a different segment for me to ease my mind. Well, this went on through the whole 9 months, and believe me, it made my life so much easier, because every time I was frightened about something, I'd think of his advice and what he had to say, and almost until the day I delivered, he just talked me through the whole thing, and it made my life so much easier. God bless his memory.
Now, there's one person at least who's here representing his family, because he never worked with us, but I think he hung around a lot because his father was one of our beloved engineers. That's Fred Edwards. Lee, I'm looking at you. Share some of your memories with us, if you would, please.
Oh, my.
Well, there is one memory I have, and you don't know this. This was in the age of the Great Hartford Open. I used to go with my dad out to the Great Hartford Open when he'd take the TV truck out there, get everything set up for the show, and I will never forget this one day. It was Pro-Am Day, and he would toss me the keys to the golf cart every so often and send me on errands. This particular day, someone had come out from the studio, and we had to go look for the film crew, so he could bring the film back to be edited for the special that would air that night about all the celebrities who were at the Great Hartford Open. This was in the era of Sammy Davis Jr., Jackie Gleason, Milt Berle, they were all there. Bob Hope. And there were 2 events that occurred on this jaunt down the fairways looking for this film crew, where the first time I'm looking at the fella who's with me, and we're going between 2 particular fairways, and he said, you might want to stop and wait a second and let this guy hit his golf shot. So we stop, and we wait, and I look over to see who he's talking about. It's Bob Hope. Bob Hope takes his second shot, hitting toward the green. And as he walks back to his golf cart, Bob Hope looks over at us. We're looking at him. He sits down behind the wheel of the golf cart and starts going like this. Start drag racing. He's on the golf course. We're in the rough next to it, and we're racing down to his ball. A short time later, we still hadn't found the film crew yet. We're getting a little discouraged, and we're between 2 other fairways. And all of a sudden, we hear the crack of a shot, and
4.
And we figured, all right, this can't be good. We stopped dead in our tracks. And as we're trying to figure out where the shot came from, we're looking at the crowd who's standing along this one fairway. And if you can imagine, we're sitting like over here, and the crowd is watching the ball. And they're going like this. And all of a sudden they're looking at us. And I'm thinking, this can't be good. I look up in the sky, and here comes this ball, heading straight for the golf cart. It bounces literally off the top of the steering wheel, and it starts to bounce back towards the fairway. Come to find out later on, it was a tee-off shot from Jackie Gleason. And I looked at the guy next to me, and he looked at me, and he said, you know, keep going real quick. We probably don't want to be here when the officials come to see what happened to this ball. And I'm just praying the fact that I am not speaking 2 octaves higher at this time in my life. So, those are some of the stories I can share. And also, just the fact that whenever I used to run around Broadcast House when I was a kid, and Dick can probably attest to some of this too, I can remember my father always telling me, whatever you do, stay off the 4th floor. You can go anywhere you want, but don't go up on the 4th floor. I used to drive the elevators up and down, and I used to go down to the reception and where the broadcaster statue was. And I used to go up to the 3rd floor, go out onto the plaza and everything else, but I was always tempted. But I heeded my father's advice. I did not want to face Under Sally for any reason whatsoever. Stay off the 4th floor.
Thanks. That broadcaster statue is still on display, by the way, in the lobby of the current CBS-owned WTIC out at Executive Park in Farmington, where I will be tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with a fellow named Ken Crowley, doing our next series of radio and TV audio. But one other person that we haven't heard from, and anybody else who wants to add that, by all means, just raise your hand. But Howard Corey hasn't got up here yet, so you come on and share the microphone and give us one of your fond memories, too.
Now that everybody is recounting their memories, I'm beginning to come up with a few that I had sort of forgotten about. But I remember talking about Gail King. I think I ran into her when she just came to work. She came from Missouri and came to be the weekend anchor. It must have been on a Sunday afternoon. I was going down to the garage out to State Street, and she was coming in, and her hair was up in curlers, and she's wearing flip-flops. And I says, boy, that was my first impression of Gail King. But of course, she's gotten much more gentrified as time has gone on. So that was one memory. And there was another time when we talked, like on weekends, on Sunday nights, it got kind of slow around Broadcast House, and we had a show on the air called Peter Marshall. I guess it was on tape or something, but we used to call Joe the guard, who was the receptionist on the weekends, and different people would call him and ask to give a message, or they wanted to talk to Peter Marshall, and then he'd have to go into a complete explanation of why he couldn't talk to Peter Marshall, because he was on tape and so forth and so on, and so he couldn't talk to him. So a few people called like that, and then eventually another person would call Joe the guard and say, this is Peter Marshall. Have you ever got any messages for me? So that's one of the things that happened to expel kind of a slow day at Broadcast House. And I think the first time I went to Broadcast House was, it's in a quadrangle, and there's an elevator on opposite corners. And I didn't know there was any difference in the elevators, but on the one corner was the regular elevator that everybody used, maybe we'd go up to the 3rd floor. And the other elevator, which was a smaller elevator, was, went up to the 4th floor. And this gentleman came on, turned out to be Paul Morency, and he says, who do you represent? I says, well, I sort of, I'm in between. I'm looking for a job here. So that was one thing that I remember from the first time I've gone to a broadcast house, because being in a quadrangle, it got confusing, you know, if you hadn't been there enough to always figure which side of the building you're on. So all the 4 sides of the building were the same pretty much. And now to think of it, when I was over to the ARRL 100th anniversary convention in 2014, across the street, I looked out over the walkway there from the Phoenix building, and I looked over at Broadcast House. I said, this is where I worked. And videotape was up against the garage because there was no windows. It was on the 2nd floor, and it was right up against the garage. You could see the garage wall, and no more Broadcast House. It's just a memory, you know. I said, geez, I could just see it right there, even though it was gone. So, thank you very much.
Speaking of ARRL, which I don't know if it's still in Newington or not.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
One of the members that we didn't have a name for when Dave was listing those who are no longer with us, he never worked with us at TIC, but his father did. For many, many years, always smoking a pipe. John DeLisa. John's son, Ron, passed away over the winter. So, and Ron had worked with Bill Kaluch, one of the smartest engineers ever at Channel 3 and TIC. Who was the first one I ever met who made his own Trash 80 computer long before they were even started. And also was a helicopter pilot, which caused his death, actually. He died in the fog bank. But Ron DeLisa passed away within the last 6 months, so that's one more to add. Now, is there anything else to add? Doug?
I would just say that we've talked very briefly about Arnold D'Angelo. And he was the reason I came to TIC.
You Syracuse guys stick together, you know.
Arnie had come down here from HEN in Syracuse, and I was working there out of college. And I came through with my wife on vacation on the summer of '66, I think, and did an audition while I was there, and was hired the next year. And Arnie and I worked together in a number of sporting things over the years, and one of them was the old Hartford semi-pro football team, which we broadcast games for. And I vividly remember one of the games, we went down to Raleigh, North Carolina, and they had a tailback for this team that was, he was like 3 feet high, and he just run like a rabbit, and nobody could catch him. And late in the game, he corked off a run of about 85 yards, through everybody, and scored the winning touchdown. Well, we climbed on the plane to come home from Raleigh that night, and the team was in really good spirits, and down the aisle of the Mohawk aircraft are trash cans full of ice and beer. Somebody in the team said, let's all run to the back of the plane. And suddenly the cockpit door opens and the pilot comes out and says, get back in your seat. So in those days, you could go up in the cockpit. I loved flying, so I would go up in the cockpit, and I sat up there and just had this wonderful experience as we flew home over New York City. You could see all the lights of New York City and the coast of Connecticut, and even from that distance you could see the runway lights at Bradley. So we started into the descent at Bradley, and in the back of the plane, I mean, they're having a great time, and everybody's tanked to the winds. And as we start the descent, the door opens and the stewardess sticks her head in the cockpit and she says, when you land, could you please not use the thrust reversers? We've got all these trash bags in the back and they'll fall over. And she shuts the door and the pilot turns to the co-pilot and he says, only on Mohawk. And the other one was, I was doing color with Arnie on a UConn game out of before the big arena was built out there. and they were playing Hawaii. And the Hawaiian broadcasting system had taken our feed, and it was my task to provide room for 31-minute commercials. So every time there was a break, I had to talk for exactly 61 seconds and provide the space for that commercial 30 times. My mind was mush, but it worked. But he was such a great guy, and I've followed him over the years since here, and he was so revered and so rightfully so. And he was so respected as an announcer and as a sports announcer, and every bit of it was deserved. He was quite a guy.
He was not only very good in sports, he was quite an expert in music too. He was an accomplished clarinetist. Jim went to Juilliard for our School of Performing Arts for clarinet in New York, which is the ultimate at that age level. And Arnold did something similar up in Cortland, New York, where he auditioned for the Air Force Band. And he could have joined the Air Force Band, which is quite an accomplishment, but he wanted to go into broadcasting. And unfortunately, the day of his funeral was the Newtown tragedy. But he had a huge turnout at the funeral home. That was back in December of whatever year. We lose track of time. But losing track of time means that this is 2016. And TIC TV signed on in 1957. Now, I don't know how many years ago that is. I don't do the math anymore. But it was in September of that year. And only a few of us who were there at that time, but I'm glad to see that some of us have still survived to say that we're here today too. Dave was just in high school or even younger at that time. So Dave, I'm turning it back to you so we can keep these things going. Because if we don't, we're going to miss out on some of the people we won't see again. So Dave, it's all yours. Dave Kaplan, just back from China.
One of my favorite, I can't call it a blooper, is they had a power outage some evening, and Doug was on the air, and he talks about the power outage, and he says the name of the squirrel that caused it's being withheld, pending notification of next of kin. But thank you all for coming. We're going to see you, I guess, September 2017 is what we're talking about. We also, before we lost Ken, who had to leave, but I think we'd all like to try and get together for another group photo up on the stairway. And thank you all for coming, and I see a lot of hands. Yeah.
May I say just one thing?
Sure.
I'm Jean Bertel. I'm here by marriage.
Yes, Jean Bertel.
One of the Channel 3 employees that was so well loved, Jack Luker. And I want you to know that I spoke with Lois just a few days ago. She was thinking about coming. She's living in Naples, Florida now, but she asked me to give her best regards to everyone here.
Great.
So, regards from Lois.
Dima Thompson, also by marriage here, without umpteenth time. But I just wanted to say, Dave, next September 17, when we meet, will be your 70th anniversary of the 1953 debut. So I don't know if you want to do something special.
I'm not sure what we can do, just hope everybody can show up. And actually, one thing I want to do is thank the Officers Club, because I couldn't do this without the Officers Club. To have to try and find a venue, worry, are we going to make the minimums? Actually, we got 2 more this year than we did last time. But the Officers Club, they put on a great feast, and they make it easy for us to come and have a good time.
Yes.
So I want to say thank you to them.
Roselle McDonald, I just wanted to know if anyone remembers John Welch.
Oh, sure. I'm in touch with his son, Tim.
He was my uncle. You talked to Tim?
Yeah, now and then. Nothing else? Why don't we have a...
Well, I was curious as to what you did in China.
Had a lot of Chinese food? I think my 2 takeaways from China are, one, if you see a Chinese restaurant here, that's what the country looks like. I thought it was just stuff they would do here. The entire country has these weird little, not weird to them, but in nice rooms with angles and things at the end. And they have those Chinese lanterns that you see at the restaurants. They're all over the country. It's just not what they do here. And the other is that their drivers there make New York and Boston drivers look like saints. They'll pass on hills, they'll pass on curbs. If it's a two-lane road, they'll make a lane in the middle and try and pass around that. And scary as heck, but we had a good time. And thank you.
The ones, my basic philosophy.